First, well, let me say from the outset that I understand the need for economic stimulus when the economy is on the rocks. The most basic economic theories will tell you that when the private sector is in strife and unemployment is on the march, you need government to take the lead and generate policy that will engender a return to growth. But with all of that established, I fear that we actually risk creating an environment here that encourages a spending free-for-all where no idea or sector of society are undeserving of a handout, all in the convenient name of economic stimulus. Now, COVID-19 has certainly turned the world upside down. I don't need to tell you that. But we must be vigilant to stop it turning good economic management on its head as well, because it'll be very tempting for both sides of politics to put their foot on the fiscal accelerator from here on in, appease every begging bowl from every corner of society, and justify the profligacy by uttering the word COVID. Yes, having deliberately put the economy into recession, it is the political class's responsibility to put the train back on the rails, but not at any cost. The budget made for some pretty hard reading. $213 billion in deficit. Net debt to peak just shy of $1 trillion. Over $100 billion in JobKeeper, $14 billion on new or accelerated infrastructure projects, billions more, apparently, on low emissions technologies, a further $1.5 billion for aged care, and of course then there's Home Builder, Job Seeker, another billion on this job trainer scheme, and then, of course, the tax cuts, about $85 billion worth, I think, when you look at it over the next 6 years. And of course for Labor and many of the lobbyists, well, that's not enough. They want more for childcare, more for power lines, aged care, the environment, you name it, they want more. So it's raining money. But let's remember it's money we don't have. It's borrowed money that'll have to be paid back one day, and it's a debt that the young will burden their whole working life. Now, I think it's time our leaders take a deep breath. And whilst they exhale, perhaps they can start to think about hard and think hard where to save a quid along the way. As I've said on this forum before, a pretty good place to start would be federal-state duplication. There's billions there to be found if only we try. Well, Stephen, you've been at the centre, of course, of forming budgets. What do you make of it?
Well, the budget is aimed at a recession as if it was a recession in 1990. Part of the problem is that the focus of the government has been essentially to try and stimulate what you would call the traditional areas that would be, call it a tradie-led recovery. But if you look at where the economy has moved to from 1990 through to 2020, you'll actually see that the number of women in the workforce is moved up substantially since those days, and that the people who've been hit hardest in this recession have been women and the sectors that they are predominantly in. So we've got a budget recovery strategy that's aimed at a recession that we had in 1990, if you like. So I think you're very, very right to draw out some of those things about the begging bowls, but this is a government that hasn't actually understood where the core problem is in the economy at the moment.
Well, you'll speak about that a bit later, Stephen. Let me ask Prue. I mean, it does seem, doesn't it, Prue, that there's everybody out there now saying, well, look, COVID's here, we need to spend to stimulate the economy, so what about me? And I haven't heard anyone in government say too often, well, actually, no, you've got enough.
Well, it's it's all good for us to sit here and criticise, but, you know, we've never been through something like this.
True.
And I think that the government had to act fast. What's worrying me is that we now have a welfare system that before COVID was bad enough, because there were too many people who were just using it as a generational income and job. But we now have a system, and it was on the news tonight, where there were restaurants that just cannot get labour. So we have to quickly stop feeding this welfare to people. It's a disincentive and it's hopeless. And then we have the converse problem where we have people who've worked hard all their lives. These are the lifters, the self-funded retirees who are being penalised or ignored, and they're going backwards. We have levels of migration, of course it's stopped at the moment, where they seem to be a fast lane to welfare. So we have all these problems that we need to address, and I feel very sad for the coming generations because we're going to leave this legacy of billions of dollars of debt. And I just don't know how we're going to fix it. And we've got this ageing economy where so many, the biggest sector is going to be old people like me who are in a nursing home, who aren't earning, who aren't paying tax. How are they going to survive?
It's one of those big questions. Now, Kai, I mean, Prue touched on it there, but, I mean, it's often the case, isn't it, that intergenerationally we have people say, well, look, we want to leave the joint a better place than that which we found it from our forebears. I'm not sure that the current generation's going to be able to say that after COVID, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I agree that we're just moving into debt very, very quickly, and it does seem that even as a Conservative government, a lot of the principles about financial prudence do seem to have been, let's just say, they've shifted significantly, right? But on the other hand, I mean, if there is a time where you are going to spend to try to keep the economy going, wouldn't it be at a time when you have record low interest rates like we do at the moment? Like, I'm not saying that means we should just be going hell for leather, because ultimately that money's still going to be paid back, and those interest bills will still mount up. But I do agree that we need to be a little bit more selective. I mean, things like JobKeeper, that was such a... I mean, you know, the stories that you hear about how disincentivising it's been for many people to go back to work are just crushing. And I think any Conservative should just blanch at hearing stories about people who just simply refuse to go back because they're making more on JobKeeper than they were before. And I know the amount has been cut. Yes, certainly we need to be a lot more targeted, I think, with our policy responses. Yeah,
I mean, Stephen, Kai just touched on there that issue of interest rates being at historic lows, and that is very true. But, of course, I suppose that argument only holds water if you're going to be borrowing the money to build an investment, something that over the long term will deliver a return on that investment. But it does seem a lot of the borrowing, yeah, we're borrowing like it's going out of fashion, but it's going on essentially welfare-related items, which... It's not as if you're getting a Snowy scheme out of it or a Harbour Bridge out of it, which is going to, you know, drive productivity enhancement 30 years hence.
Or a national broadband network. Sorry, I had to toss that one in.
Yeah, of course you did.
No, look, you're dead right. I mean, that's where the intergenerational argument on equity, you've got to make sure you're not comparing apples and oranges. If, as you've just said, Michael, you are building an asset which will be used by young people, whether it's a road or whether it's a dam or whether it's a national broadband network down the track over many years, then they are getting the benefits of it. But if it's being used to rack up debts for paying wages, what you would call recurrent spending, then yes, you've got to be very conscious of that. And that's frankly where I think the government haven't got the balance right. They did put in place an overly generous scheme. I mean, I've watched ministers say, look, we just had to do it really fast. If we were going to sort of tailor it down to how much people earned previously, it would have taken months for them to get the money. So we just had to throw all the money out the door at once so that we could get the money into the economy so it didn't absolutely collapse beyond where it's already collapsed. So I can understand. I was in Cabinet, in government, when we went through the global financial crisis. You've got to make fast decisions. But the consequence of that decision has been identified that we've got people now who, frankly, are saying, hey, I won't go back to work because I'm getting more now. Now, that's being taken back and cut back at the moment. So that incentive...
Labor wants to give them more, Stephen.
No, what Labor wants to do is actually was critical of the blanket throw out because they missed people. They could have been narrower in who they gave it to, and they could have given it to selectively other people than actually received that amount of money. So, no, it's not quite right, Prue.
No, I don't think you are either. I think that, you know, Albanese's been big on this. He's saying that they want it to extend and they want to give them more. And this is the problem, that Labor wants to build this community of welfare recipients, and it's just unaffordable, and it's not good for their mental health either.
But this is going to be the concern, isn't it, Kai, from what Prue's saying, and that is that if a coalition government says, well, we're going to spend like it's going out of fashion, Labor are given a hall pass to say, well, Me Too plus 10%, aren't they?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, if the coalition is offering to spend X amount, and Labor's obviously always been seen themselves, I guess, as you could say, more generous when it comes to welfare, then it certainly opens the door, I guess, to a lot of those previous schemes. Like the idea, for example, of free childcare for all, for example. Look, I've got an 8-month-old. I'd love free childcare. I'd love a lot of free stuff as well. But on the other hand, I would like my 8-month-old to not be in debt by the time that he reaches a productive age as well. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The coalition is not going to be in power forever, and if they have set a new baseline for what is considered, an acceptable level of welfare spending, then we're in a little bit of trouble. And personally, I'm really heartened to hear that Stephen acknowledges. I think, I mean, I'm not sure where exactly he's wrong, Prue, but I think it's great that he's acknowledging that we can't be just pouring money into stuff that isn't productive or isn't an investment.